The moment my daughter-in-law lifted her glass and said, "That's all you deserve," the room leaned in like it had been waiting for permission. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created by the Raices Rotas channel team, based on real-life situations to convey lessons about family, emotions, and human values. All characters and events are illustrative. My name is Lenora Hale. I am 68 years old, and I have learned the sound of a smile that means harm. Vivian Hale delivered hers perfectly. "Lenora," she added, "sweet as glaze, you never did have much of an appetite." She nodded to the plate in front of me. A cold roll. No butter. No explanation. A few people laughed. Not the uneasy kind. The easy kind. The kind that says they understand the rules. I didn't move. I didn't look at my husband. Thomas stood at the edge of the table with his hands folded, the same way he does when he wants a moment to pass. He said nothing. Vivian took a sip. Ethan, my son, stared at the floor. The laughter settled into conversation again, as if nothing unusual had happened. Vivian leaned closer, her voice low. "We didn't want to waste good food," she said. "You know how it is." Then she straightened and clinked her glass again. "Already done with me." I folded my napkin once. My hands were steady. That surprised me. What surprised me more was how familiar the feeling was, being edited out, being reduced. I had managed this family's schedules for decades. I had balanced accounts, caught mistakes before they became scandals, remembered birthdays no one else could keep straight. None of that counted tonight. I felt the weight in my purse then, the small rectangular shape I had carried without intention to use. I had brought it out of habit, the way you carry a spare key you hope you will never need, across the table. Thomas laughed softly at something someone said. It sounded practiced. I picked up the roll. It was dry. I set it back down and smoothed my skirt. The noise around me returned to normal, comfortable and careless. I stayed seated, listening, letting the silence finish its work. I stayed at the table long after Vivian moved on, my presence shrinking into something decorative. That had become my role, background noise, furniture that once mattered. Thomas leaned toward me briefly, his voice low and careful. "Let's not make this into anything," he said, not unkindly. That was always how it began, not a defense, a suggestion. Peace offered at my expense. "I'm fine," I replied. The words came easily, too easily. For years, I had learned how to smooth moments before they hardened. When Vivian corrected my stories mid-sentence, when she joked about my memory in front of friends, when she once introduced me as Thomas's first arrangement, then laughed as if she had misspoken, each time I swallowed it. Each time the room relaxed. Ethan used to whisper, "She doesn't mean it. Mom." He stopped saying that once silence proved more efficient. At home, Thomas would pat my shoulder and say, "She's under pressure," or "She didn't grow up like you did." There was always a reason that required me to be understanding. There was never a reason for her to stop. I realized something sitting there, listening to voices overlap without mine. Silence had never been neutral. It had been labor. Quiet work that kept dinners pleasant, marriages intact, and other people comfortable. Every time I chose not to respond, someone else benefited. Vivian passed behind my chair and murmured, "See, that wasn't so hard." Her smile did not reach her eyes. I nodded once. Old habit. What she never understood was that silence trains you. It sharpens your attention. You start noticing patterns. You start remembering details others assume you missed. You learn when people think you are no longer relevant. They stop hiding their hands. I had not stayed quiet because I was weak. I had stayed quiet because it worked, just not for me. When the evening finally thinned and coats were collected, Thomas touched my elbow. "You ready?" "Yes," I said, And for the first time in a long while, it was not an answer meant to soothe him. There was a time when nothing in our household moved without passing through my hands first. Lenora will know, Thomas used to say whenever something went missing or a date was forgotten. He said it with confidence then. Pride. Even, I kept the calendars. I tracked the accounts. I noticed when numbers didn't align, when payments arrived early or late, when a signature looked rushed. I did it quietly, because quiet work lasts longer. Before Vivian entered our lives, Thomas trusted me with everything that required attention. When his consulting firm expanded, I organized the transition. When his first partner retired, I reviewed the contracts line by line. I wasn't on letterheads or at dinners, but decisions passed through my kitchen table before they ever reached a boardroom. "You have a head for this," Thomas once said, handing me a stack of statements. Better than mine. I believed him, not because I needed praise, but because the work proved it. When Ethan married Vivian, the shift was subtle at first. Vivian would ask questions I had already answered. She'd suggest systems I had been using for years, repackaged with newer words. "We should streamline," she told Thomas one evening, tapping my ledger aside. "It's sweet, but outdated." Thomas laughed. "She likes doing it her way," he said. Meaning me. Vivian smiled back. That was the first time I noticed the smile didn't reach her eyes. Slowly, my access narrowed. Not removed. Redirected. Vivian offered to help. Then insisted. Then assumed. I watched as shared folders became private ones, as emails stopped copying me, as decisions arrived already finalized. I did not forget how things worked. I was not confused. I was excluded. That distinction matters. People mistake silence for ignorance. They confuse patience with absence. But when you have spent decades holding things together, you learn where the seams are. You learn how systems fail. You learn that nothing truly disappears. It is only moved. Vivian believed relevance fades with age. That once a woman steps back, she forgets the details. She never noticed that I still read everything handed to me. That I still remembered how accounts flowed, how signatures aligned, how language shifted when someone wanted something quietly. I had not lost my place. It had been reassigned, and I was still watching. Vivian was careful about where she aimed her words. In public, they landed like compliments. In private, they cut. At a brunch a week after the dinner, she rested her hand on my arm and said to the table, "Lenora has such a simple way about her. It's refreshing." The women smiled. I felt her fingers tighten just enough to register. Simple was the word she used when she wanted to shrink me. Later, in the kitchen, she dropped the softness. "We'll handle the planning from here," she said, opening her phone without looking at me. "You've done enough. I wasn't offering," I said. She glanced up, surprised, then smoothed it away. "Of course not. I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed." Ethan stood by the counter, scrolling. "Vivian's just trying to help." "Mom," he said, still not looking up. His voice had learned the rhythm of neutrality. It kept him safe. At another gathering, someone asked me how long Thomas and I had been married. Before I could answer, Vivian laughed lightly. "Forever," she said. She remembers everything important. The room chuckled. I watched her file that away as a win. When I spoke, she redirected. When I paused, she filled the space. When I corrected her, she turned it into concern. "Are you sure?" she'd say gently. "You've had a lot on your mind." Thomas noticed the tone, not the content. "She means well. He told me once in the car. You know how she is." I did. I had started keeping track, not in a notebook, in patterns. Vivian never contradicted me outright in front of Thomas. She waited. She softened the edges. She made sure I looked difficult if I resisted. One afternoon, as she gathered papers from the desk I used to manage, she smiled and said, "You don't need to worry about these anymore. I've got it." "I know," I said. She paused, confused. She expected gratitude or compliance. What she did not expect was that I had already memorized what she carried away. Vivian believed I was harmless because I no longer fought for space. She mistook my stillness for surrender. I let her believe it. I noticed it because the number sat where it did not belong. Thomas handed me a printed statement one morning and said, "Can you glance at this?" Vivian said, "Everything's been consolidated." He sounded relieved, as if order had already been restored. I looked because that was what I had always done. "It's fine," I said aloud. Then I looked again. One entry was off by a few $1,000s. Not missing, not alarming, just misaligned. Just the date was correct. The description familiar, but the account routing didn't match the pattern I'd seen for years. Vivian appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Everything good?" she asked, already smiling. "Yes," I said. I slid the paper back. "Just checking." She took it from me without hesitation. "I've reorganized how things move. It's cleaner now." Cleaner was not the word I would have used. Cleaner suggests fewer steps. This had more. That afternoon, I pulled an older file from my drawer. Not out of suspicion, out of habit. I compared dates, then categories. The numbers balanced, but the paths had changed. Funds were not disappearing. They were being rerouted. Temporarily, perhaps, or permanently. That part was unclear. At dinner, Ethan mentioned a new investment Vivian was excited about. "She's been working late," he said. "Learning the ropes." Vivian laughed. "Someone has to," she said, glancing at me. "I don't mind the responsibility." "I'm sure you don't," I replied. Later, when Thomas stepped outside to take a call, Vivian leaned toward me. "You don't need to worry about those old systems," she said. "They were never really yours anyway." The words were casual. The implication was not. I found the second inconsistency the next morning. Different account. Same detour. That was when the shape of it formed. Not theft. Not yet. Control. Access granted quietly, then widened. Permissions adjusted. Oversight thinned. I closed the folder and placed it back where it belonged. I did not confront her. I did not warn Thomas. I had learned what warnings do. They make people hide better. Instead, I started paying attention in a way I had not needed to for years. Not with fear, with clarity. Marian didn't ask why I called. She never did. When I said, "I need you to look at something," she replied, "Bring it by." We sat at her kitchen table with the files spread between us. Marian had spent 30 years managing administrative records for a medical group. She didn't skim. She traced dates, headers, sender lines. She worked in silence until it meant something. "This isn't sloppy," she said finally. "It's intentional." I nodded. That's what I thought. She tapped one email with her pen. "See how the language changes here. Temporary access becomes ongoing oversight." That's how people widen a door without announcing it. There were more. Not many. Just enough. Emails forwarded to personal accounts. Calendar notes that didn't match meeting minutes. A recorded voicemail Ethan had accidentally backed up to the family cloud. Vivian's voice, light and dismissive. "Once this is finalized, she won't even know where things live anymore." Marian exhaled slowly. "She talks like you're already gone." "I know," I said. "You could stop this quietly." Marian said, "Redirect things back. Lock her out. No one would ever know." "I don't want quiet," I said. The words surprised me. "I want it to end." She looked at me then. Really looked. And Thomas. That's the weight, I said. Not the files. Not her. Marion slid a small drive across the table. Everything's here. Originals, timestamps, nothing altered. I held it without picking it up. If I show him, I change everything. You already have, she said. You just haven't said it out loud yet. That night, Thomas mentioned Vivian was handling more responsibilities. It's a relief, he said. I don't have the energy for details anymore. I know, I said. I meant it. In the quiet after he fell asleep, I transferred the files myself. Slowly, carefully, not as a weapon, as a line, something you do not cross without consequence. When the drive clicked shut, it felt final, not dramatic. Final the way boundaries are when you stop explaining them. I didn't wait for dessert. While voices lifted behind me, I excused myself and walked down the hall. Thomas still called his office. He followed a few minutes later, loosening his tie, already distracted. Everything all right, he asked, closing the door behind him. I took the small drive from my purse and placed it on the center of his desk. I didn't slide it toward him. I didn't dress it up with context. What's this, he said. Watch it, I replied. Alone. His brow creased. Lenora. If this is about what Vivian said, it isn't. I said, my voice surprised us both. Calm. Even. Not just that. He picked up the drive, turning it between his fingers. You're upset. I've been quiet, I said. There's a difference. He hesitated. Why now? Because minutes ago, I realized I was done pretending this was small. Thomas sat, then stood again. He didn't like being cornered. You could have come to me. I am, I said. This is me coming to you. He looked at the door, then back at the drive. Is this going to cause trouble? Yes, I said, but not the kind you think. Silence stretched. He waited for more. An explanation, an apology. I offered neither. You want me to watch this tonight? He asked. Yes. And then what? Then you decide what to do with it, I said, and what to do without me. That landed. He flinched. Just slightly. You're not threatening me, he said. No, I said. I'm stepping back. I moved toward the door. He called my name once. Softer this time. Lenora? I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I'm not explaining. I said, not tonight. When I left the room, the noise from the gathering rushed back in. Vivian laughed at something across the table. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. I walked past her without slowing. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for permission. Thomas didn't come back to the table. I knew when it happened without seeing it. The laughter in the other room kept going. But something underneath it shifted. A pause too long. A note out of place. He called my name from the hall, not loudly, not softly either, just enough to carry. When I entered the office, he was standing behind the desk. One hand braced against the edge as if the floor had tilted. The screen was still lit. Vivian's voice had been frozen mid-sentence, her mouth open in a careless laugh. She says your name like this, he said. He didn't look at me. Like your furniture. I said nothing. He pressed play again. The room filled with sounds I had heard too many times already. Vivian explaining access. Vivian dismissing oversight. Vivian laughing about how I would never notice because I was used to staying out of the way. Thomas closed his eyes. Not in disbelief. In recognition. I didn't stop it. He said, I told myself it wasn't my place. He sank into the chair, slower than I had ever seen him move. I let her talk about you like that. From the doorway, Vivian appeared. She must have followed the silence. What's going on? She asked, smiling out of habit. Thomas didn't answer. He looked up at her then, and whatever she saw on his face made her stop. Thomas, she said again. Her voice tightened. He turned the screen toward her without speaking. She took one step forward. then another, her confidence draining with each second. When her own voice filled the room, stripped of charm, she reached out. "That's out of context," she said quickly. "You know how things get recorded." "Do they?" he said. She swallowed. "She's twisting this." I met her eyes. I didn't blink. Thomas stood. "No," he said. "She's been quiet while you spoke freely." Vivian's face lost its color, not all at once. It faded, as if something essential had been unplugged. "You're choosing her," she said, not angry yet. Afraid. "I'm choosing what I ignored," he said, "and I'm done pretending that wasn't a choice." The noise from the gathering pressed in through the walls. Thomas reached for the desk lamp and turned it off. The screen went dark. "We'll talk later," he said to Vivian. "Not tonight." She looked at me one last time. Searching for something to argue with, I gave her nothing. Thomas opened the door and stepped aside for me. As I passed him, he said quietly, "I should have listened sooner." The room behind us stayed silent. Vivian found me near the window, her composure already cracking at the edges. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, lowering her voice. "You know how files can be stitched together. Anyone can make things sound bad." I didn't answer. She pressed on. "Thomas is tired. You know that. He gets confused when people overwhelm him with details." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. "You didn't have to do this." I folded my hands. Still nothing. Her breath caught. "I was protecting the family." She said, "Someone had to step up when you stopped." That one almost earned a response. Almost. Thomas entered then. Carrying a thin folder, he didn't look at either of us as he set it on the table. "Effective immediately," he said. "Access to the shared accounts is restricted. Oversight returns to neutral review." Vivian turned to him, tears arriving right on cue. "You're really doing this." Over her feelings. "This isn't about feelings," he said. "It's about authority." She reached for his arm. "I thought we were partners. You treated trust like leverage," he replied, stepping back. "That ends now." Her gaze snapped back to me, sharp and pleading all at once. "Say something," she demanded. "You always do." I stayed where I was. Thomas opened the folder and continued, methodical, "Until the review is complete. Decisions will not pass through you. That includes scheduling, communications, and financial routing." Vivian's shoulders slumped. "Not in defeat. In calculation failing." "This is humiliating," she said quietly. "No." Thomas said, "It's corrective." She waited for me to soften it, to explain, to absorb the damage for everyone's comfort. I didn't. When she finally walked away, her steps were unsteady. The room felt different without her voice filling it. Thomas exhaled and rubbed his forehead. "You didn't need to say anything," he said to me. "I know," I replied, "for years." My silence had been used to smooth over other people's messes. Tonight, it did something else entirely. Vivian did not disappear overnight. People like her never do. What vanished first was her access. Thomas handled it quietly. No announcements, no confrontations staged for sympathy. The next morning, he said, "The review is complete," and slid a document across the table. "You're no longer authorized to represent this household or the firm." Vivian stared at the page. "You're cutting me out," she said. "I'm correcting a mistake," he replied. Her voice rose. "After everything I've done." "You did plenty," he said. "That's the problem." What followed was not dramatic. Invitations stopped arriving. Committees replaced her with neutral names. Accounts she once spoke about confidently now required approvals she didn't have. When she tried to explain herself, people listened politely and changed the subject. Credibility, once cracked, does not argue back. She cornered me one last time near the car. "You won," she said. bitterness stripped of polish. I didn't compete. I said, I stepped away. Thomas watched without intervening. That mattered more than anything else. In the weeks that followed, power shifted without noise. Oversight returned to shared responsibility. Decisions slowed, then steadied. Thomas asked for my input again, not out of habit, but respect. I gave it when it made sense. I withheld it when it didn't. Independence feels like that. There is a lesson in all this. One I learned late but thoroughly. Silence can be generous, but it should never be permanent. When you give it endlessly, people mistake it for permission. When you withdraw it, they call it betrayal. Neither is true. It is simply balance returning. Vivian lost what she valued most: reach. Not reputation alone, but the ability to move things without being seen. She wasn't ruined. She was limited. And limits reveal character faster than punishment ever could. Near the end of the week, Thomas said to me, I didn't realize how much you carried. I did. I answered. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, or subscribe. Quiet stories often belong to people who were never heard when it mattered. Sharing them helps someone else recognize themselves sooner. I kept my dignity because I stopped offering it as collateral. Respect didn't return with apologies. It returned the moment access ended.